The beautiful North Carolina Museum of Art is located off Blue Ridge Road in Raleigh, several hours east of Cabarrus County. The 164 rolling acres that make up the Museum of Arts has two major buildings, East Building and West Building. The stunningly beautiful West Building, which was completed in April 2010, houses the permanent collection of the museum. The East Building houses special exhibitions of well-known artists such as Claude Monet. The beautiful North Carolina Museum of Art also boasts several miles of walking trails, an outdoor theater at which concerts can be held, and also has a wonderful collection of outdoor sculpture. I'm Clarence Horton. On behalf of Cabarrus County and all the persons and organizations that are dedicated to preserving her heritage and her history, welcome to another historical moment in the life of Old Cabarrus. North Carolina citizens are justly proud of the fact that when the North Carolina legislature authorized the expenditure of public funds in 1947 for the formation of a state art museum, we were the first state to expend such funds to provide an art experience on behalf of her citizens. It took great courage and vision on behalf of her legislative leaders. We believe, however, that the history of the Art Museum begins earlier, long before 1947, and can be found written in the colonial and revolutionary history of that rolling land which was then a part of Mecklenburg County and is today a part of Old Cabarrus. A tall white granite obelisk in Concord's historic Oakwood Cemetery towers over the neighboring stones and markers around it. It bears the coat of arms of the pioneer Pfeiffer family on all four sides of the granite base that supports it. The shaft itself is decorated with carved bands. The monument is somewhat of a mystery. It bears the name of four members of the first two generations of the Pfeiffer family, none of whom are buried here in Oakwood Cemetery. And the family name is spelled differently between the first and second generations of the family on the monument itself. The patriarch of the family, Martin Pfeiffer Sr., left his home in Bern, Switzerland at age 16 to travel to the broad lands of the New World. It is believed that his brother John accompanied him, although we can't be certain of that. The young men were members of the noble family called the Pfeiffers of Pfeiffersburg. We know that land was purchased in Pennsylvania and later in Virginia, but believe that eventually both brothers made their way down the Great Wagon Road to the back country of North Carolina, to that section that we call today's Piedmont. It is believed that John settled in Rowan County. Martin, however, moved to that area of Anson County, which later became Mecklenburg in 1762 and Cabarrus in 1792, and bought a large tract of land along Great Coldwater Creek. There he and his lovely bride, Margaret Blackwelder, who was herself the daughter of another pioneer Cabarrus family, there they built an imposing plantation home and reared three sons, John, Caleb, and the youngest son and namesake Martin Jr., who was born in 1756. The family were well known in the community as being good farmers, grist mill operators, and innkeepers. Martin Sr. was quite popular with his neighbors. He served with them in the colonial militia, and they later elected him to serve in the Colonial Assembly and later in the State House after independence from England. Prior to the Revolution, he entertained Royal Governor William Tryon on several occasions at his lovely home along Coldwater Creek. The plantation fields along Coldwater Creek were also the meeting place for the Mecklenburg militia for many years. This stately monument was erected in Oakwood Cemetery at the direction of a descendant of Martin Pfeiffer Sr. and his sons John, Caleb, and Martin Jr., a young man named Robert Fullenwider Pfeiffer, who was born here in Concord and spent his early years here. Robert Pfeiffer, whose friends called him Bob, left directions in his will to have this monument erected in a prominent location in order to honor the pioneer heritage and contributions of his family to the history of this region. He did so, although none of those honored are buried in this cemetery. They're buried in the old family cemetery near Red Hill Plantation in Cabarrus County. Robert Pfeiffer's own parents, Caleb and Adeline Ramseur Pfeiffer, are buried in the old Presbyterian Cemetery in Concord, which we now call Memorial Garden. Martin Pfeiffer's sons had equally distinguished careers. His oldest son, John, who was born in 1747, was a well-known local orator and was noted among his neighbors, had a great reputation both militarily and politically. John signed the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence in 1775, was a representative to the colonial assemblies in 1775 and 1776. As a lieutenant colonel, he served in the early campaigns against the Cherokee Indians and against the Tories in South Carolina. Unfortunately, this gifted patriot contracted a disease as a result of exhaustion from those campaigns and died at an early age. He was buried here in historic Pfeiffer Cemetery, which is located just across the old road from Salisbury to Charlotte and just across the road from historic Red Hill Plantation and a few miles west of present-day Concord. According to family tradition, British soldiers camped in the Pfeiffer Cemetery during the Revolution and built a fire on top of the tomb of John Pfeiffer, splitting the tombstone which covered his grave. Martin's second son, Caleb, who was born in 1749, also served his region as a representative in the legislature from Old Mecklenburg County. Caleb served valiantly as a militia officer during the American Revolution. Following the Revolution, he worked tirelessly in the legislature to have Cabarrus County set off as a separate county from Mother Mecklenburg, and finally succeeded in doing so in December of 1792. He then served his new county as a member of the state Senate until 1801. His younger brother, Martin Jr., was also noted as an eloquent speaker, as a representative of the people, and as a good business person. Martin Jr. served in the Continental Line and was a part of the group who traveled to the Northeast and was a part of General George Washington's forces for some time. President Washington remembered Martin Pfeiffer and stopped at the Red Hill Plantation to spend the night on his 1791 tour through the southern states. This historic cemetery has suffered from the neglect of centuries. Fortunately, the Lieutenant Colonel John Pfeiffer chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution have begun the difficult work of restoring the cemetery. That work was completed early in the year 2012. Robert Pfeiffer was born in a home on North Union Street in Concord in 1849. He grew up in a house on the present site of today's First Presbyterian Church of Concord. He inherited his father's business ability and his mother's love of beauty. As a young man, he attended Davidson College for a time, then left to become a successful cotton buyer and broker in Newberry, South Carolina. He became a wealthy man by age 32 when his doctors advised him to give up his business interest. He did travel, learned to play golf, and began to collect art objects from around the world. He moved to New York City, where he became an active member of the Salmagundi Club and the Calumet Club, men's art societies. There he began to put together what became an extensive collection of paintings and art objects. He kept in touch with his native Cabarrus County, however, visiting home often during hunting season. He also owned extensive real property in the area and corresponded with local realtor John K. Patterson about those holdings. As he became older, he began to worry about the final disposition of his art collection. His first thought was to return it to his native Concord or to the neighboring city of Charlotte, but neither community had an art museum in 1927. Concord, however, had always had a long-standing love for music and for the arts. Today she has a very active arts council which is housed in the historic Cabarrus County Courthouse. In addition, the city of Concord established an artist studio, which also contains a gallery where the works of local artists are displayed. However, there were none of these things in 1927. Fortunately, Bob Pfeiffer began a correspondence with his longtime friend, John J. Blair, who was the newly elected president of the North Carolina Art Society. Mr. Blair jumped at the opportunity that was being offered North Carolina and agreed to display a large group of Pfeiffer's collection at the North Carolina State Fair in 1927. The display drew large crowds and was a great hit. Pfeiffer was so impressed with the success of the display that he agreed to send 10 of his paintings to the next annual meeting of the North Carolina Art Society. As a result of his continued correspondence with John Blair, Robert Pfeiffer provided in his will for the disposition of his entire art collection. The entire collection, consisting of some 88 paintings, including 3 that he had painted himself, was to be transferred to the North Carolina Art Society. When Pfeiffer died on 16th of October, 1928, he died content that he had made every effort to provide for the care of his beloved paintings. Following his death, the people of North Carolina, through their legislature, provided in 1947 that substantial funds be set aside to be used for a future state art museum. By that time, several trusts in the Pfeiffer will had come to fruition, and the Art Society was able to transfer an additional $300,000 to the North Carolina Museum for purchase of paintings to be used in its collections. As a result of the efforts of Robert Pfeiffer and the funds provided by the state, you're able to see today in the museum works by well-known old masters such as Claude Monet and Jean Millet, and also works by new masters such as Georgia O'Keeffe. The work that Pfeiffer did is intended to provide a lasting benefit to the people of his beloved state and his region. In 1973, in recognition of his efforts, the North Carolina Museum of Art hosted a special exhibition displaying representative works from both Pfeiffer's original collection and from the works purchased with funds from the Robert F. Pfeiffer bequest. In accordance with his final instructions, Robert Pfeiffer was returned by train from Battle Creek, Michigan, to his native Concord, to be buried near his father and mother in what was then called the Old Presbyterian Cemetery on South Spring Street in Concord. His sister, Sally Pfeiffer Williamson, visited the cemetery and was concerned that it was so overgrown and ill-tended that she spent the next years of her life restoring and developing the area around the graves of her relatives and ancestors. She died in 1937, and then her son, Marshall Pfeiffer Williamson, continued the restoration work until 1966. The garden was eventually renamed Memorial Garden in honor of the mother, Mary Adeline Ramseur Pfeiffer, of Sally, and of grandmother of Marshall Pfeiffer Williamson. After Marshall's death, he left some funds in trust, which have allowed the cemetery to be maintained during these years and the restoration to continue. It exists today as a quiet, peaceful haven of exquisite beauty in the middle of downtown Concord. It doesn't lie far from the Union Street shops where the Pfeiffer ancestors managed stores, nor is it far from the rolling hills and creeks which reminded them so much of their native country. And it's not far from the muster grounds where they trained as militia to defend the country that they had adopted and the land that they loved. The legacy of the Pfeiffer family's accomplishments and their contributions to their region and to their state is found not only in old legislative journals or in the records of ancient battles. Today it's prominently displayed on the walls of the North Carolina Museum of Art. During a special exhibition in 1973 honoring Robert Pfeiffer, art lovers commented at that time that the momentum provided by his bequest and by the gift of his paintings provided not only the impetus for North Carolina to form an art museum, but helped the New Art Society survive the grim years of the Depression. Even notable accomplishments dim with time, however, and many people have forgotten the part that Robert Pfeiffer played in the establishment of a state museum. Perhaps a fitting tribute to Pfeiffer and his family for the contribution they've made would be a display of a portion of his paintings in his native Cabarrus County, in the county and in the city that he always called home. We thank you for joining us for another episode in the history of Old Cabarrus as we turn another page in that history, the history of this special place, this Cabarrus. We hope to see you again real soon.